So it was 1988. I had just graduated from medical school and I was on my very first all-night shift in the ER. It was organized chaos. It was absolutely crazy. Nothing had prepared me for this. Finally, about 9:30, the chief resident said, "You know, Michelle, if you're gonna get something to eat, you better go now." I was stressed, I was tired, I was hungry, overwhelmed. I raced down to the cafeteria and I headed straight for the salad bar. Because on that particular night, I was back on my diet. So what did I get? Big pile of lettuce, yeah? Carrots, dressing on the side, no cheese, no croutons, a little bit of seeds and no nuts because it was 1988. Nuts were bad, right? Suddenly I heard, "Michelle." Oh no. In the corner of the Good Samaritan Regional Medical Center cafeteria, they have this stack of bulk candy bins. Did I mention that the food was free for residents? And on the bottom row of these bins was this big container of malted milk balls. Not the little hard marble-sized malted milk balls that you get in a carton. These were those double-dip chocolate, ping-pong ball-sized malted milk balls. Do you know what I mean? And they were calling my name. I knew this scene. I had done it so many times before. I had been dieting literally since I was 12 or 13 years old. So I started my little battle, and I wonder if some of you know this little battle. No, I'm gonna be good. I'm not having malted milk balls again. I'm having salad, right? But it's gonna be such a long night. What if I get hungry? What if I don't get another chance to eat? I better just, no, I'm gonna be good. I'm not going to blow it again. And I did this little battle, back and forth, should, shouldn't, good, bad, and I lost. Again. I filled a little sack of malted milk balls and I slipped them into my white coat pocket. I had malted milk balls in one pocket and my Merck medical manual in the other pocket. And I headed back to the ER. That place was crazy. It was just like Grey's Anatomy without all the sex. So that was really the first time that I had full awareness that food could call me by name. And despite the fact that I knew more about nutrition than most doctors because of all the dieting I've done, can you relate to this? Yes? I still had not been able to control my eating. So I went into family medicine. I practiced medicine for another 10 years. And I heard this story over and over and over again. And of course, I referred people back to whatever diet of the day was, my favorite diet, and they would come back and tell me the same thing, or I would see the same thing. And so after a while, I began to think, this doesn't really make sense. I mean, I'm a pretty smart person. I have a successful medical practice, a couple of kids. This guy is the CEO of this company, and this woman is managing a family of 6, and this one's the principal of a school. They all seem very smart, very competent. They knew what to do. I know they did because I told them. Yet we continued to struggle. So finally, by about 1998, 1999, I had my aha. And that's what I want to share with you, is the shift from that good, bad thinking into what now I practice and teach to lots of other people and lots of health professionals. And so what I'd like to have you do is start by thinking about somebody you know who doesn't struggle with food at all. Do you know anybody like that anymore? Get at least one person in your mind. If you're lucky, it's you. It might have been you in the past, or it's maybe your partner. We hate that, right? Somebody who doesn't struggle with food at all. And I want you to think about what you've noticed about what they do and how they make decisions about their food. Does everybody have somebody in their mind? So this person that you're thinking of is somebody that I will say eats instinctively. So what do I mean when I say instinct? So it's natural, it's innate. They're not thinking about it all the time, right? And that's what drives us crazy about it. So I had 3 of these people in my life. My husband, which is really annoying, isn't it? And my 2 children. And I noticed that I was the one who was ordering the salad and they would have the burger and the fries. Yet I seemed to be the one that was always struggling. So as I observed their behaviors and noticed that they had a very different relationship with food, this opened my mind to a new way of thinking. And eventually I developed something that I call the mindful eating cycle. We're going to use it this morning. We'll use it this afternoon in our workshop. It opens every chapter of every book I've written, every workshop that we do. Because the mindful eating cycle is a very simple, deceptively simple way of thinking about all the decisions that we make around eating. Why do I eat? When do I feel like eating? What do I choose? How do I eat it? Physically, how do I consume it? How much of it do I eat? In other words, when do I stop? And then where do I invest the energy that I've consumed? Pretty simple? Now, any model should work on any situation. So let's think now about this person that you were thinking about a moment ago. I said that this is a person who eats instinctively. So we're going to look at the instinctive eating cycle. Why does this person eat? Think about this person that you had in your mind. Why do they eat? So they have to, right? They're eating because they need fuel. Their why, their primary driver of their cycle, is the need for energy. So if they eat because they need energy, then when do they feel like eating? Right? They feel like eating whenever they get hungry. They don't have to think about it, they just know. These are people who will eat in front of other people just because they're hungry, right? These are also people who will not eat. They'll say, well, I know I just had a big dinner, I don't eat ice cream, right? So these are people who primarily eat for hunger. Do they ever eat when they're not hungry? Yes, of course. That's really important. It's part of normal eating to sometimes eat purely for pleasure or convenience. It's just that that's not their primary driver, is it? So, what do they eat? Think about the person you had in mind. What do they eat? Whatever they want. We really hate that about them, right? So they eat whatever they want. They're not obsessing about every calorie. In fact, very few of them, in fact, I don't know anybody who truly follows an instinctive eating cycle who counts calories or exchanges or points at all. True? Yes? So how do they eat it? And I'll help you with this one. I use the word intentionally, and I want to explain it in this way. Many of you stayed here at the hotel, and when you came to the hotel, you maybe walked in the room, checked it out, picked your bed, and then maybe you noticed the temperature of the room, and you decided whether it was comfortable or not. And then you went over and you adjusted the thermostat to what you feel is a comfortable range for you. Now, did you go back and adjust the thermostat every 30 minutes? No. You just left it alone, and you trusted that thermostat to read the temperature of the room and to turn the air conditioning on if it got too hot, and to turn the heat on if it got too cold, which is never going to happen here, I can see, right? And automatically, without us having to do anything, it keeps that room in a comfortable range. People who eat instinctively keep their fuel level in a comfortable range. When they get hungry, they start feeling uncomfortable. Maybe they feel a little anxious or nervous, or maybe they find it harder to focus. Maybe they get a little bit irritable, which is not what my husband calls it, but you know what I mean, right? So they feel uncomfortable, and that drives them, that triggers them to want to eat. And so if it's convenient and there's food that they enjoy and they're able to eat, they will consume food. And they will begin to eat food until they reach the point when they notice that they're about to cross that little invisible line back into discomfort again. If you cross that line, they will stop eating, even if there's perfectly good food on their plate. Apparently their mother didn't know about the starving children in fact, these are the people that would say, well, mail it to them, right? And they were right, weren't they? That would have helped those children a lot more to mail the food to them than for us to consume the food we don't need. And then they go out and they use their energy living their life. They work, they play. Do they exercise? Let's do a poll. How many of you were thinking of somebody who eats instinctively and manages their eating effortlessly, who goes to the gym for 30 to 60 minutes, 6 days a week? Raise your hand high. It's about what I usually see, maybe 5%. How many of you were thinking about somebody who's active, who likes to maybe play tennis, maybe goes for a walk, walks their dog, plays with their kids? Yes, stands at the back of the room, you know, all kinds of little activities. Yes, so these are people who typically have an active lifestyle. Now, how many of you were thinking about somebody who doesn't do anything at all? So another maybe 5 or 10%, which is important because who is exercise good for? People who need to lose weight or want to lose weight? Of course, it's good for everybody. And when we focus on weight or BMI as the primary treatment objective, we are missing the point. Healthy eating and physical activity is good for everybody. When they're done, however they use their energy, they get hungry again and they go back through the cycle again. When they're little, they might need to eat every 2 or 3 hours. As we get older, we're able to space those meals out. And we don't have to think and talk about food all the time, do we? So everybody, say with me, duh. Duh. Right? The good news is that every single one of us was born with the instinctive ability to manage our eating this effortlessly. Every single one of us, with very, very, very rare medical conditions that override this. So what happens? What happened to so many of us that we no longer follow this pattern? So now, think about somebody you know who follows an overeating cycle. Maybe yourself, or maybe somebody that you care about that you've observed. And I want you to think about the same decision points. And let's go through this mindful eating cycle again and see if we can understand a little bit about what happens to us when we're overeating. So when you're overeating, why are you eating? Stress and boredom. Okay, so I did a survey out on my Facebook page. Facebook, Am I Hungry? Is my Facebook page. Some of you already said that you follow me there. I did a survey there and got tons of responses. What is your primary trigger or your main trigger for overeating? And do you know what the top 2 triggers were? Stress and boredom. Stress and boredom are opposites. Stress is having too much to do, and boredom is not having enough to do. Isn't it interesting that food can fix both of those problems? See, food begins to balance us. It equalizes our mood. It equalizes the way that we feel. It equalizes our energy. Why else do we eat when we're not hungry? It's time, so we eat by the clock. Yep. It's convenient. So isn't it convenient nowadays? There's food everywhere. Oh, like the taste. So here's a little thing you should know about me. My husband is a professional chef. Oh, it gets worse. My parents own 3 Mexican restaurants in Phoenix. Oh yeah, we like the taste of food, don't we? I heard celebration. Yes, that came from somebody. Is celebration unique to the United States? How many cultures do you think celebrate and mourn with food? It is part of normal eating to have emotional connections to food. In fact, I would say that it is healthy to have emotional connections to food. It's our first connection to our parents. It's the way that we commune. How many of you have enjoyed sitting over a meal with your friends here at this meeting? Eating socially and celebratory and even for comfort is normal and healthy, as long as it's not our primary way that we cope and entertain and distract ourselves. So in the overeating cycle, what happens is that we end up driving our whole cycle by all of these triggers. So we're eating when we're sad, mad, glad, stressed, or bored, right? The whole thing. Now I added a little image here that's not so obvious to many people. It certainly is not obvious to my colleagues in the medical profession, but I'm going to tell you that when somebody says, why do we have so much problem these days? There are lots of reasons, and you've heard lots of them already. But I'm going to tell you that one of the problems is pictured there on the lower right-hand corner. What does that woman represent as you look at her? It's deprivation. She's deprived. You can't see it very well. She's eating a salad and drinking her water. And it turns out that research has proven that deprivation and restriction drive cravings, drive us to think about food all the time. It's partly physiologic because certainly we are designed to survive starvation, and it's partly psychological. We actually have chemical processes that get set up in neurochemistry and neural connections in our brain that drive us to eat when our body thinks we can't. So I don't know about you, but when I was on a diet, I was thinking and talking about food all the time. Yes? Yes. Maybe even more than when I was overeating. True? So this, I think, is one of the drivers of what's happening now. And doesn't it make sense that if the solution is actually part of the problem and nobody seems to recognize that the problem would get worse and worse and worse. And so what's going on right now is we're giving people more solution. And the problem worsens and worsens. Many of us have experienced this on a very personal level, and we're seeing it, I think, on a global level, especially in westernized cultures. But if we don't understand this at a gut level, then we will blame ourselves. Because interestingly, all diets work, as we've heard, as you know, at first. And then when they don't work, we assume that we did something wrong. We blew it. We were weak-willed. We didn't have enough willpower. Are you with me? Yes? So here's the problem. If you eat when you're sad, mad, glad, stressed, bored, when you see food, when there's free food, when you've paid for food, isn't that funny? When you paid for it, you have to eat it all, but if it's free, you have to eat it all? I didn't say it made sense. It just is, right? So if we're eating for all of these reasons, when do you feel like eating? All the time. All the time, because we are constantly experiencing emotions, and we are constantly in our abundant food environment being exposed to food. So if we're being driven by these things, then we're going to experience a lot of the struggle of feeling as if I want to eat all the time. So if that's the case, aren't marketers going to take advantage of this? Because if you don't have your own little triggers, they're going to implant them for you. After 12 hours in a business suit, for me it was a white coat, after 12 hours in a business suit, she's looking for a treat. What's the treat? How did you know that? Doesn't say Haagen-Dazs anywhere on that label. Right? You only need to see half of an inch of a label to not only know what product it is, but how it's supposed to make you feel. Right? Does the name Pavlov ring a bell? What flavor is it? No, I'm just kidding. Don't answer that. Don't answer that. Okay, so if you eat when you're sad, mad, glad, stressed, or bored, what do you feel like eating? Cheese? Chips? Cupcakes? Popcorn? Chocolate? Pizza? Cheez-Its? Right? Coffee? With cream? Little vanilla flavoring, right? So isn't it interesting that why we're eating determines what we feel like eating? Why we're eating determines what we feel like eating. Because I don't know about you, but if I'm eating to decompress or relax or comfort myself, I'm not going to go out and throw a little 3-ounce piece of salmon on my grill. I'm not doing it. Ultimately, these foods become associated with the comfort and the pleasure that we're seeking. Can these foods bring us comfort and pleasure? Of course, temporarily, thank you. So that's the problem, right? It's temporary. So, of course, like any medication, we need to redose ourselves over and over and over again. For me, it was malted milk balls. Now, I, for a long time, had so much guilt and shame about my lack of willpower. I was going to be a doctor, for heaven's sakes. I should be able to do this. It wasn't until many years later that I began to recognize that those malted milk balls saved me. That those malted milk balls got me through one of the hardest years of my entire life. I didn't have better coping skills at the time. I didn't know how else to take care of myself. I just knew that food worked and I was going to survive this. I wanted to survive it. And I suspect that some of you have used food to survive your lives. How's that working for us? At some point, those curves begin to cross. And the pain and the discomfort of it begins to outweigh the survivability of it. And so at one point we get wise and we decide that's not working for me anymore. You know, I think get into this mindless habit of eating. So think about yourself the last time you overate or binged. Would you think about that in your mind? How did you consume that food? Fast, right? Why do we eat fast? Feel better faster? We're looking for that rush so we don't know what we're doing. Why else? We're in a hurry. Isn't that interesting? We don't give eating time. We talk and think about food all the time, except while we're eating it, and then we're thinking about the next thing we're going to do. How else do we eat? Socializing, distracted, watching TV, driving, working, hiding. Hiding. Calories don't count if I don't pay attention to it. So how many of us are eating differently in private than we do in public? So we have created so much shame around eating, especially if you feel that you're in a larger body and people are paying attention to you. You feel like people are judging you for what you eat, and so we tend to eat a certain way in public where people can see us and then do it differently in private. What happens to any behavior that you feel ashamed about or feel that you need to hide? Does it go down? It goes up, right? We put it in the closet, we feel ashamed, and then there's this whole guilt thing. Now remember, one of the most powerful triggers for overeating are these emotional triggers. Now how do you think guilt affects overeating? Right? And then on top of it, if I'm overeating and I wasn't supposed to because I had surgery or I'm on some diet or I spent a lot of money to do some program, I'm even more guilty. So I got to eat more food. Do you see how this works? So we end up in this cycle where we're eating in a completely disconnected manner. This is so important because there's this belief in Western society that we can be more productive and more successful and accomplish more and be a better person and people will like us more and we'll be richer and more beautiful, and it's this really driven work ethic. But the truth is that the brain cannot focus fully on more than one thing at a time. That's why texting and driving is illegal in most states. That's why when you're trying to listen to a lecture but you're answering email at the same time, even if you are trying really, really hard to do it, at some point you have no idea what's going on. So we can do 2 things at once, or 3 or 4 things at once, but we can only fully pay attention to one thing at a time. So if I am eating pizza, which I have done probably 1,000 times in my lifetime, and I'm watching a brand new episode of Law and Order, what do you think is going to happen to my brain after about 2 bites of that pizza? I check out, right? I consume the rest of the pizza. I know how to eat pizza. I've done it so well that I don't need to think about it. Have you ever pulled up to a 4-way stop and had no idea who was next? You think if we can drive a 2-ton vehicle that we can also consume a bag of Cheetos without paying any attention? Right? It's very easy to do with practice. I had a lot of practice. So how much do you eat when you're in an overeating cycle? In other words, if hunger doesn't tell you to start eating, what tells you to stop? When you're out, when the food's gone, right? What else? You feel physically sick? Physically sick, exactly. What else? Somebody comes home, right? So many of us have this unconscious message that we got from our parents. Our parents and our grandparents grew up in a time when food was scarce. And so they taught us to clean our plates. Don't waste food. There are starving children, right? So many of us have this unconscious message that drives us to fear wasting food. And so we will eat food that we don't need. Now, in an abundant food environment, we act as though it's going to go away. We don't have scarcity anymore. And this is not a talk about children. It could be. For those of you who are parents or grandparents or aunts, stop telling your children to eat all their food and clean their plates. Stop it. Stop it. They will be fine. When they say they're done, they're done. And if they say they're not hungry, they're not hungry. Trust them. Because keeping the ability to trust your internal instincts to manage your eating will serve them so well in our abundant food environment. All right. So is chocolate the problem? Probably not. It's probably why we eat the chocolate that's the problem. Right. All right, so where does this excess fuel go? What does your body do with food that it didn't actually ask for? Yes, it stores it. It's not out to get us. It's not our badge of shame. Our body is merely saving the energy until we need it later. You combine that with the sedentary lifestyles that we just heard about, and we end up with a mismatch, of course, Of course we do. And so in this overeating cycle, we are going through our lives using food for other reasons. We sometimes eat when we're hungry, yes, sometimes. But there's so many other factors that are playing in. We have a saying, when a craving doesn't come from hunger, eating will never satisfy it. When a craving doesn't come from hunger, eating can never satisfy it. This is why we find ourselves at the refrigerator over and over and over again. We know better, we know we shouldn't, we swore we weren't going to, and somehow it's like a magnet that just draws us back because there is this empty bucket that hasn't been filled, and so we keep trying to throw more food in it, trying to fill it. This does not mean that everybody who struggles with food has deep, dark psychological problems. Many of us don't. Many of us just have habits and some psychological problems. You know, we have habits and inability to cope. So we end up trying to meet our needs, as I was with those malted milk balls, in the best way that we know how. Now, the problem is that in our culture, the side effects of this cycle cause us to end up in some type of a restrictive eating cycle. Now, when I started this work back in 1999, my whole story was all about this yo-yo dieting. So I focused a lot on weight management in my early career. What I know now is that restrictive eating is ubiquitous in our culture. We certainly, as a medical physician, we see it in diabetes. Those of you who've had bariatric surgery experience this kind of a pattern on a regular basis. But you even see it, eat local, eat organic, eat vegetarian, don't eat. There's so many rules about food in our culture these days, aren't there? It just drives you crazy. So let's take a quick look at this restrictive eating cycle. Why are you eating when you're in one of these cycles? It's all about the rules, right? So the rules are absolutely based on what's popular, what the latest research says. And for those of us who've done years and years of dieting, we have a chapter from every rule book we were ever on. So we walk into a store or open a menu and we're like, celery. Oh, and then you have bariatric surgery, it's like, oh, no celery either. It's this entire process of driving ourselves crazy with these rules. Now, I want to differentiate. Rules are different from choices. So wanting to make a healthy decision or knowing that a certain food feels bad when I eat it, deciding that I'm going to eat in a certain pattern is very different from restrictive eating. And let's talk about how restrictive eating plays out. What are some of the rules about when to eat when you're on a diet? Eat every 3 hours. Now here's the rationale. Whatever you do, don't let yourself get hungry. You heard this? All right, now I'm gonna tell you what my impression is of this. When we teach people, don't let yourself get hungry, what we're teaching them is you cannot be trusted around food. You cannot trust your own biological drive to eat. You should eat before hunger ever comes. What I really think most people mean when they say that is don't let yourself get too hungry, right? Because being too hungry is a biological driver. Remember, your blood sugar's low, your brain isn't functioning on full power, you might have low energy. All the best decisions that you had intended kind of go out the window when we get too hungry. But it's going to happen anyway sometimes. There's no choice. Sometimes the waiter's slow or something happens. So knowing that that's a possibility helps us notice what's going on. What are some of the other rules about when to eat? Don't eat after 7. And I actually learned that one in medical school. Did you learn that one in medical school? You know how your metabolism shuts off at 7:01? What's that rule really about? Why do they make a rule about not eating after 7? Right? So we're eating after 7, most of us, not because we're hungry, but because we're bored, we're rewarding ourselves, we're watching TV. That's really the big issue there. The problem is that a lot of these rules actually work. They are actually very helpful. Except that what I learned when I was a psychology undergrad is something that we call locus of control. Locus of control is who's driving the bus. When I make a rule for you and I tell you, you can't eat after 7, you have to eat every 3 hours, it might be helpful for you for a little while because it creates some structure. But ultimately, it is an external locus of control. It's me telling you what to do. You might never realize the whole time you're doing that diet that the real reason you eat after 7 is because you're rewarding yourself for finally getting the kids to bed. So when you go off the diet, you don't have to follow the rule anymore, so you go right back to doing what you were doing before. Doesn't this happen to us? Go off the rules and it's all out the window. Any other rules about when you should eat? Breakfast. You have to eat breakfast. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And it is. Unless you've been eating all night, then it's not that important. So sometimes we're not hungry for breakfast because there's other things going on that need to be looked at first to understand, because technically you probably will be hungry after a period of fasting for 8 to 12 hours, don't you think? So ultimately, it's all about getting away from the rules and starting to really understand, why is it that eating regular small meals works for me? Why is it that eating breakfast helps me? All right, now what about rules about what to eat? Right? So the rules are changing all the time, and if you were dieting for 25 years like I was, and I suspect some of you were, you've seen it all, haven't you? The rules are constantly changing. So in our bariatric surgery program, one of the things we talk a lot about is that nutrition information should be a tool, not a weapon. Nutrition information should help you feel better and be healthier. It should not be used to restrict and deprive and beat yourself over the head with. Other people should not use it against you. So ultimately, by learning nutrition as a way of guiding our choices with balance, variety, and moderation, we can really eat what we love without obsessing about everything that we eat. Now, how do you eat on a diet? Rigidly, weighing, measuring, counting, thinking and talking about food, or now there's an app for that, right? You're thinking and talking about food just as much as when you were overeating. And so ultimately, what is the purpose of getting healthier? What is your why? What is your purpose of wanting to be healthier? Live longer. Enjoy your grandchildren, have a better quality of life. What I was finding for myself is that weighing, measuring, and counting and obsessing about food and exercise was not giving me a better quality of life. And we've already heard over and over and over again that there's no end point to that. We already know that the minute you stop obsessing and focusing on it, there you are again. And so ultimately, this idea of paying all this attention is misplaced. It's important to be attentive and mindful, but not to be obsessed and consumed by it, because ultimately we don't actually get what we actually started out for, which is a better quality of life. So, how much do you eat when you're in an overeat or in your restrictive eating cycle? Not enough. Not enough. Sometimes we're feeling hungry all the time. Sometimes it feels like you're choking all the food down, right? So again, it's not about what you need. And then, of course, where are you spending all your energy? Now, I haven't talked about exercise, but I want you to think about this. I'm sure you've seen many, many, many images or tables like this. If you ate 2 chocolate truffles, you have to spend 20 minutes on your bicycle. Have you seen this? When we teach people to trade food and exercise, we are teaching them that exercise is punishment for eating. And so they would come into my office and they'd go, Dr. May, I know I should exercise, but I hate it. Well, yeah, of course you hate it, because you've been taught that it's punishment. You've been taught that it's penance for eating something bad. You've been taught that you have to earn the right to eat. The right to eat is essential to life. Exercise is for a whole lot of other amazing things that it does for your body. And when I speak to health professionals, one of my messages to them is never, ever, ever talk about exercise and weight loss in the same office visit. Because we don't want people yo-yo exercising the way they yo-yo diet. Now, I have to underscore this because, doctors don't get this, right? They've been taught, eat less, exercise more, eat less, exercise more, eat less, exercise more. So I say, well, have you ever seen this? If you want to ride your bicycle, you have to eat 2 chocolate truffles. And they go, well, no, I've never seen that because that would be stupid. Exactly. Doesn't work this way. All right, so ultimately we get stuck in these rules. So we're thinking and focusing on food all the time. We turn healthy eating into a 4-letter word. We turn exercise into punishment for eating. Now here's the problem. This is not working. We've had 100 years of dieting history. It is not working, and it never will. I don't care what diet it is, it's never going to work long-term for the majority of people. Look, if she can't do it, how are mere mortals going to be able to do this? So here we are in my summary, and I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about the details and how to do this afternoon, and I'm going to spend some time out at the book signing area talking and answering your questions. But I want you to leave you with this. This feeling of overeating is about being out of control. I know what to do, I'm going to be good, today it's going to work for me, I can do this. And then something happens and it all spins back down again. And so we decide to go back on a diet and we end up in this restrictive mode and we're gonna be so good. In fact, I learned how to use a yo-yo just for you. I'd been yo-yo dieting for 25 years, but I never learned to use an actual yo-yo. So you go on a diet and you wind yourself up tight, right? You know what it's like? You pick your diet, you clean out your refrigerator, you get out your journals, you're committed, you listen to some motivational talks, right? So you're all wound up. And then something happens, stress comes, right? Or maybe you get overly hungry. You get ready for a cruise, you wind yourself up really tight to get ready for your cruise, and then you go on the cruise, and you come back from the cruise. Do you know what I'm talking about? So this process of going on and off the diet is this typical yo-yo pattern that we hear about. But here's the problem. A yo-yo doesn't stop in the middle. I can't even barely yo-yo, much less do a walk the dog trick. Small percentage of people seem to know that trick and they do fine and they can stick with the diet for the rest of their lives, and that's great. That's awesome for them. It wasn't awesome for me. And so the rest of us end up in this eat, repent, repeat cycle. On the diet, off the diet, on the diet, off the diet, never finding a balance in the middle despite our best wishes. And so what I really want you to think about is the concept of something called mindful eating. Now, I showed you the mindful eating cycle. That should tell you that my opinion is that mindful eating isn't just tasting and smelling food. It is the entire process of decision making. Why do I eat? When do I eat? What do I choose to eat? How do I choose to eat it? How much of it do I eat? And then, importantly, where do I invest the energy that I've consumed? Mindfulness is not about being in control. How long can you be in control? It is about being in charge. So I think, and what I discovered for myself, is that this idea of mindful eating is about consciousness. It's about awareness. So let's go back to this idea of mindlessness for just a minute. Mindlessness, we have a trigger. So this is, for those that can't see it, it's a movie theater. So what do you immediately think of? Of course you think of popcorn, because that's what we do over and over and over again. So we walk into the movie theater, we smell the popcorn, we see it, we think about it, and we react. We react out the past over and over and over again, because when you're mindless, that is all you can do. When you are mindless and you have checked out of your brain has no choice but to do what it always did before, which is order popcorn. Now, mindfulness does not assume that we have to get rid of movie theaters or never go to the movies again or not go to that party or not eat that food ever again. Mindfulness assumes that we are aware of our triggers. And when we notice that we're in a trigger situation, we just pause for a moment. What that pause does for us is it gives us response ability. We don't have to react out the past. We get to respond to that situation in the way that works for us now. So it's a paradigm shift. So this is, I think, the biggest, most important thing I'm going to say to you, and that is that when you get into this paradigm shift, it's no more of a yo-yo, it's a pendulum. You see it? You might undereat sometimes, you might overeat sometimes. You might eat uber healthy sometimes, maybe other times not so much. But you have a range. And as you begin to give overeating and undereating less of your energy, your pendulum finds a smaller arc in the middle. Now, my arc is different than your arc, and actually my arc has changed over the 15 years that I've been eating this way. It has actually gotten more narrow, not because I have to, but because I've learned through awareness. Ultimately, if you tried to stay over here in a restrictive eating cycle, how much energy does that take? And what happens the minute you let it go? So by making small changes, by pausing, by having awareness, you have the ability to make changes that are lasting, that don't require restriction and deprivation. That is what I want for you. Thank you.